In an essay in the Atlantic Monthly, correspondent Jonathan Rauch heralds the rise of an attitude toward religion that he believes is nothing less than a major civilization advance. The attitude is one to which he subscribes, along with, he contends, more and more people of all faiths and no faiths in our country today. He stumbled into a descriptive term for this way of thinking about religion when, at a party, he was asked where he would place himself in the spectrum of religious thought. Rauch said he was about to own up to his long-time and unapologetic atheism when he realized that atheism was no longer a good enough descriptor for his theological position. Not because he was no longer an atheist, but because many years had passed since he really cared one way or the other. He decided a more accurate description for his religious perspective would be apathyism. Apathyism, which he defines as a disinclination to care all that much about one's own religion, and an even stronger disinclination to care about other people's. Apathyism. He explains in the article that apathyism concerns not what one believes, but how one believes it. Therefore, apatheists can be atheists or agnostics, but perhaps even more importantly, and the real triumph of apatheism in Rauch's view, is that they can be believers too. The major qualifying factor that makes someone an apatheist, then, is not her belief system per se, but her attitude about her belief system and about belief systems in general. Apatheists are comfortable viewing religion as a personal preference, and they do not get caught up in the details of different perceptions of God or a lack thereof. Apatheists are not anti-religion. They just don't care enough about it to want to insert themselves into the religious lives of others. As I understand the concept, apatheists could be placed at one end of a continuum of religious attitudes, the other end of which would hold evangelical fundamentalists of many stripes. Those people who not only follow the cut and dried answers of their rigid belief systems, whether they be Christian or Islamic or even atheistic, but who expect others to agree with them or suffer the consequences, hell, jihad, or intellectual insignificance, as the case may be. On the surface, apatheism sounds like a good idea, and compared to the rigidity of fundamentalism, it is definitely a cultural improvement. Certainly, most of us would agree that throughout recorded history, enormous amounts of damage have been done by humans wound too tightly in their own religious zeal. An increase in the number of people who are committed to more relaxed religiosity, who do not see it as their religious duty to separate the saved from the unsaved, the sheep from the goats, the pure and holy heterosexuals from the wicked and evil homosexuals, just to name one still sadly pertinent example. I mean, that can't be anything but good, right? The elimination of this perspective. The rise of apatheism, then, could be seen as a welcome indication that more and more people are not taking religion so seriously, and frankly, in a world where those holding fanatical religious views can put entire countries on the defensive, it's about time. So on the one hand, I appreciate Rauch's celebration of the apatheists out there, folks like himself, who can see that their perspectives are inherently limited, and that others can have equally valid, non-violent, non-coercive theological viewpoints that may or may not inform one's own. After all, no matter what form our perception of the divine might take, and whatever way we may choose to describe those perceptions, there is far more mystery than certainty when it comes to concepts of God. Therefore, different perspectives should not only be expected, they should be welcomed. I also can go along with the idea that the world would be a better place if more people were at ease with religious difference. I should clarify here what I mean by at ease. I don't mean tolerance, which in its most common usage has an air of teeth-clenched condescension about it. When we say that we will tolerate someone, I think we're implying that we will put up with them even though we still think they are beneath us or not as in touch with the truth as we believe ourselves to be. Tolerance, in my opinion, is inherently closed off. It's not curious about difference and therefore has more in common with the fundamentalist pole of religious attitudes than the apatheist pole. The ease I'm talking about comes from a sense of humility that encourages us to attempt to seek understanding of and possibly respect for another's beliefs, even if we must agree to disagree. On the other hand, though, the more consideration I give to the idea of apatheism, the more concerned I become. Before I get too far, you should know that at many times in my life, I would have easily identified as an apatheist had I known the term, because my parents, whether they intended to or not, raised me as one. At the weekly services in the Methodist and Presbyterian churches of my youth, I stood beside my mom, who not only took communion and recited the creeds, but I also stood with my father, who didn't recite the creeds and oftentimes didn't even sing the hymns. As a result, from an early age, I learned that different belief systems could coincide, even get along. And it didn't make much difference what I or anyone else believed about God. It's no surprise then, when I turned 18, I did what many of my peers did, and probably some of you too. I avoided religion altogether, thereby fully embracing what I now know was my apatheism. I didn't walk away from organized religion angry at the church or angry with God. How could I be angry when I wasn't even sure what I believed? I walked away because I didn't care one way or the other. And my youthful religious apathy fit me just fine. As a side note, you may find it interesting to know that a study from a few years back suggested that at least 1/3 of Americans share a similar relaxed attitude toward religion, as evidenced by their declarations that they never go to church, temple, or mosque. Most of these people say they believe in God, however differently they perceive him, her, or it to be. Essentially, they just don't care enough to want to join a religious community. A more recent study from the Pew Research Center found that approximately 56 million adults in the U.S. are now religiously unaffiliated. That's about 23% of the adults in this country who now describe themselves as either atheists, agnostics, or nothing in particular. This group has come to be known as the Nuns, N-O-N-E-S. And many of us assume that these nuns are future UUs waiting to find us. But when we dig down deeper into the study, it seems that assuming the nuns are future UUs may be assuming a lot. While 36% of the nuns who were raised with religion say they are disenchanted or no longer believe in the religion of their youth, 10% of the nuns say they are inactive believers. They choose not to participate in religious community because they're either simply non-practicing or they're too busy. Nearly 20% are undecided in their religious views. They still have them, they're just not sure where they belong. Another 20% are opposed to organized religion in general, and 7% are simply not interested either way. By my count, whether they're potential UU members or not, that's a lot of apatheists. 56 million apatheists. When I first discovered Unitarian Universalism, I confess I was mostly drawn by what I perceived to be its institutional apatheism, though I wouldn't have used that term at the time, of course. The initial information I received about UUism assured me that my individual journey and my free and responsible search for truth and meaning would be respected, wherever that journey might lead. It was clear that UUs would do their best to leave room for those of different religious perspectives, even those who have trouble with the notion of religion at all, believing that, as I have often heard in our congregations, the questions are more important than the answers. I delighted in the idea that I could gather with others to celebrate life and to consider its limitless mysteries without having to subscribe to someone else's vision of the divine. Understand, I didn't mind hearing what other people thought about God. I just didn't want to be expected to believe the same things they did about something that was inherently too much of a mystery to fully comprehend. The good news was that in a UU setting, I didn't have to. I knew there were general principles that most people in the church claim to affirm and promote. After all, I could read them in the front pages of the hymnal and on those little wallet cards that our visitors often receive. But these principles struck me, at first anyway, as innocuous truisms that were not all that difficult to accept. More intriguing to me was the list of sources from which Unitarian Universalists claim to draw. the wisdom of different cultures and religions, science, ethics, literature, philosophy, and so on. I also appreciated the open acknowledgement of the religious pluralism of our world. In fact, in my first UU church, the Community Church of New York, banners featuring symbols of the world's great religions were all prominently displayed in their sanctuary. And the first Sunday school curriculum I helped teach not long after I joined was called Faith Across the Street. It was a program in which the children and the class leaders and parents visited the worship services of other religious institutions. This visiting other churches stuff was incredible to me, almost too good to be true. From the start, I had the impression that the entire Unitarian Universalist movement was based in the understanding that each member could choose her own religious path as she felt internally compelled to do so, without coercion or even strong persuasion from fellow members or ministers. Therefore, other than the fact that people were actually encouraged to come to church each week, the UU approach to religion seemed to be an apatheist's dream. I fit right in. Over the years, however, I learned that the living tradition of Unitarian Universalism, a tradition over 200 years in the making, is about far more than apatheism. In fact, the most important figures in our denomination's history were people who were anything but disinclined to care about religion, either their own or the religion of others. These people invested themselves enough in their religious perspectives to not just articulate their theologies, different though they may have been, but to act on them, to challenge themselves to participate in the world accordingly. These were people who took the time to intimately get to know what they believed, to never stop growing their convictions and refining their passions in the fires of thought. People who made it a spiritual practice to hold their own beliefs up against the light of other religious perspectives, and who translated their Unitarian and or Universalist faith into something that was much greater than a simple placeholder, much greater than zero. From the anti-Calvinist preachers of universal salvation, John Murray and Hosea Ballou, to the transcendentalist cultural and literary icons Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. From the devoted abolitionists Theodore Parker and Octavius Brooks Frothingham, to early feminists like Margaret Fuller and leaders of the women's suffrage movement such as Olympia Brown and our own Mary Augusta Safford and Eleanor Gordon. From A. Powell Davies, who spoke out against the witch hunts of the McCarthy era, to Edna Griffith, the member of this church, whose lunch counter stand at Katz Drug Store in 1948 led to the integration of Iowa's public accommodations. And James Reeb, who was killed while marching for civil rights in Selma, Alabama in the 60s. From the role that UU members and ministers have played in arguing for and helping win the right of same-sex couples to legally marry, to the stands that are now being taken on behalf of the right to death with dignity. Unitarians and Universalists throughout history have not shied away from unpopular positions that question or challenge the status quo. This is the legacy of our UU faith, the legacy that is ours to continue, the legacy that has compelled many of us to use our voices in recent days to argue against the defunding of Planned Parenthood, the removal of collective bargaining provisions for public workers, the demonization and scapegoating of refugees and immigrants, the attempts to create unnecessary voter ID laws that will restrict access to voting, and many other infringements on what our faith reminds us is the interdependent web, where injustice for one is ultimately injustice for all. And this legacy of our faith goes far beyond what I perceive to be the easy indifference of apatheism. It is a legacy that reminds us that our UU churches are more than just holding tanks for individual differences. They are places of inspiration and agitation that exist to remind us that it matters what we believe and how we live out those beliefs in this world. I've moved away from apatheism as a descriptor for my own beliefs because I now realize there is too much at stake to be indifferent about matters of religion. I recognize that I can't be an apatheist because while I don't wish to deny your individual perceptions of the God you may follow, I do care and am affected by what you think the God you may follow feels about me, my friends and companions, and this earth that we share. I need to be something more than indifferent, for example. If your God is telling you to discriminate against, withhold civil rights from, or persecute people simply based on their gender or sexual orientation or class or race or politics. I need to be something more than indifferent if your God doesn't expect you to challenge white supremacy or patriarchy. I need to be something more than indifferent if your God requires you to support wide-ranging censorship or the disregard of scientific fact in favor of creationism or climate change denial. I need to be something more than indifferent if your God compels you to argue against reproductive rights or access to health care. I need to be something more than indifferent if your God is okay with unfair distribution of income or privilege, or if your God sanctions misuse of the planet or doesn't expect you to question a lack of environmental responsibility, or if your God is calling upon you to take up a crusade or a holy war against another people, whether the facts support this crusade or not, or if your God thinks stealing a Black Lives Matter banner off a church is a righteous action. My ever-evolving Unitarian Universalist faith has helped me see that in all of these cases, and many more, I need to be something more than indifferent, something more than apatheistic. This is the gift, and it is the challenge of this liberal religious faith that we share. A faith with hundreds of years of history, a faith that sees divine intervention not as something that comes from without, but from within and between. A faith that, as our reading this morning claimed, requires discovering what we believe about who we are, where we are, and what we are trying to do or be, and that involves reviving those convictions every day in the face of people and events that seem to derogate and devalue all that we believe. A faith that may enable us to start from zero, but that asks more of us than we might have ever imagined when we first wandered into a Unitarian Universalist church. So now that you are here, whether this is your first day or you've been here for years, what is this faith asking of you? And what are you willing to give in return to this, our shared faith and our shared life? After all, zero is important, but by itself, it doesn't add up to very much. We are currently in the midst of our Stewardship Drive. That's why you see posters like this around, banners. This is a time when our members and friends are asked to offer their pledges of financial support to this church for the coming year. 93% of our budget each year comes solely from the pledges of our members and friends, and every dollar makes a difference in our ability to offer the excellent programming, thoughtful services, and social justice agitation that enable our church to be the inspiring, meaningful, and vital place that it is for us and for this community. I know you will be thoughtful in your discernment of what you can give to this church that is so important to so many of us. For as I have heard it said, we all have two religions. We have the religion we talk about, and we have the religion we live. It is our task to make the difference between these two as small as possible. May we be up to this task. Amen.